other places. Now, here is a complete report, and then we come back to discuss whether China delayed releasing these numbers or, more likely, that the Chinese state is still obfuscating. Let's look at this report and come back.
Hospitals running out of beds. Dead bodies piling up in mortuaries. These were videos that China did not want the world to see. But the truth is emerging gradually. Chinese authorities have now said that the COVID deaths since the beginning of December could be as high as 60,000. Authorities say that the documented deaths related to COVID occurred in hospitals, which left open the possibility of more people also might have died at home.
通过分析显示，2022年12月8日至2023年1月12日，全国医疗机构累计发生在院新冠病毒感染相关死亡病例59938例，其中新冠病毒感染导致呼吸功能衰竭死亡病例5503例，基础疾病合并新冠病毒感染死亡病例54435。
China stopped reporting data on COVID-19 deaths and infections after abruptly lifting antivirus controls in early December despite a surge in infections. Is the 60,000 deaths the real figure or just the tip of the iceberg? Bureau Report, Republic TV.
All right, welcome back. We're going to have a panel of 4 guests, but joining me as of now, Andrew K.P. Leung, international and independent China strategist, live from Hong Kong. I've had a conversation with him earlier in the evening. Very welcome, Andrew. And Dr. Ravi Godse, he's internal medicine specialist, director of discharge planning, UPMC Sherryside, live from Pennsylvania in the United States. And in a bit, we would also have Victor Gao, strategic affairs expert, live from Beijing, someone who has advised Deng Xiaoping, and Professor Madhav Nalapat, of course, our own geopolitical and strategic affairs analyst, live from Delhi in a bit. But let me begin with Mr. Godse first. Dr. Godse, is the Chinese state being little touchy and sensitive? Remember after the WHO really reprimanded the Chinese state, we had the US President Joe Biden speaking just a few hours after that WHO briefing, and he said that, I'm just quoting, they are very sensitive when we suggest they haven't been that forthcoming, which means the Chinese really react rather than respond. And that's the reason why the world really increasingly does not trust the Chinese communist state. Dr. Godse.
No, zero. Can I go watch it on there?
Okay. Come. Carry it with you.
Dr. Godse, are you getting me? I believe there is some. Are you getting me? I think there is some audio.
Sorry, are you talking to me? Or?
Are you getting me, Dr. Godse?
Is Andrew Leung in Hong Kong? Are you?
Yes, I'm talking to you, Dr. Godse.
All right. Okay. I thought you were asking the other guest.
No, not Andrew, not Leung, not Mr. Leung. I'm talking to Dr. Ravi Godse. Are you getting me?
Yes, I could hear you loud and clear. I just thought that you were asking the other guest. All right. Okay.
That's Andrew. Okay, let me begin with Andrew till the time we fix the audio with Dr. Ravi Godse. He's not getting me. Mr. Leung, let me put the question differently to you. I was asking the United States question to the guest from the US. Okay. My question to you is, Mr. Leung, are the Chinese still not forthcoming with the exact scale of the surge that they are facing? In the last 2.5 years, they have had 30,000 deaths, and now they are saying only 60,000. You think if it has doubled now, they were really not giving the true picture earlier because the surges, for example, in the Delta wave, the intensity of the virality of the variant was much higher, and hence it's possible. And at that time, even the vaccination was not as high as it is today. So it's likely that the Chinese population really suffered much more earlier, but then we don't know the truth as yet. Andrew? Andrew, did you get the question?
Okay, well, I thought you were stopping me again. Well, I think to put things in a bit of perspective, you got to look at the data, not so much those released by Beijing or by any other country, as to those recorded by the Johns Hopkins University. Obviously, Johns Hopkins is not going to accept just data fed to them by any kind of institution or any country. If you look at their website, updated on the 31st of December, they compare mortality rates of all countries around the world on the pandemic. And both China and India rank very, very low in the list. Per 100,000 people, China's death rate, according to Johns Hopkins, on the 31st of December, only less than a month ago, is 1.2 persons per 100,000. India is 38. I think Japan is, for example, is 45. But the United States is something like 300. But these figures is not just December figures, is as kind of accumulative over a period of time over the past couple of years. Well, this suggests that China and of course India have been doing reasonably well with what they do in their respective countries. China, because of lockdown, and also China, of course, using their own vaccine. Even that vaccine is less perhaps effective compared with the other Western type of vaccine. But still, the death rate has been extremely low. Now, what's happening now is because after about 3 years of lockdown, of course, the pandemic is now beginning to change into an endemic, much more infectious, but the death rate is still relatively low. And so after 3 years, the economy is suffering a huge hit.
Andrew, you're dodging the question.
That's why China's dropping the zero COVID. But this data about 60,000 deaths. China admitted it.
Andrew,
but you compare this with a population of 1.4 billion, well, it's nothing. You look at the death rate in other countries. 60,000.
Andrew,
I
understand some math.
But sadly, of course, people die because of the low infection rate, especially the vulnerable group.
I think you're not getting me. I think there's some audio issue. He's not getting me. Andrew, I understand some maths. You are dodging the question. My question was for the same population, same size, in the second wave of COVID, when the Chinese population was not vaccinated, despite the zero COVID policy, there were hardly any deaths. And now suddenly in 1 month, when you have the mildest of strains and hugely vaccinated population, you are getting 60,000 deaths in 1 month. Let me take this to Professor Madhav Nalapat. Professor, Andrew what he's doing is he's quoting a Johns Hopkins, he's quoting Johns Hopkins study and data, and he's saying per 100,000 people, the number of deaths in China is still very low. Should we really buy into that argument about statistics and more statistics and damn lies, as they say? I don't know if Andrew has heard that saying, but is China continuing to obfuscate, according to you, Professor Nalapat?
Well, look, I'm going back to 2020 and Galwan. The Chinese authorities first ignored the fact that there was a clash. Then they did not mention any casualty figures. Then they talked about 4 deaths. Then they talked about 6 deaths. The fact is that from the time of the clash, those who had access to satellite data, including many in India, they were clear that it was between 50 to 60 deaths. And Russian media reported about the same figure, but of course then the media stopped reporting anything. So the tragedy is, unfortunately, nobody believes any data put out by China. Now, coming to the point about cases and deaths, Hong Kong, where Andrew is staying, is still a location where you have much more factual information than on the mainland. Hong Kong is half the population of China, and Hong Kong is reporting something like 150,000 cases. Hong Kong is about 0.5% of the population of China, 0.5% of the population of China. Yeah. It's reporting 150,000 cases, which means if you extrapolate on the Chinese mainland, it's about 3 million cases a day. Now, that being the case, I mean, the cases reported by China seem to be a gross underestimate, and therefore the deaths are also likely to be an underestimate.
Absolutely.
As for Johns Hopkins, I don't know, Johns Hopkins has got
Absolutely.
an army of spies running around China and collecting data that the government doesn't want anybody to know. I have been to Johns Hopkins. I don't think they have this huge army of spies. I think they're just getting the data they get from China and accepting it.
Yep. I think, Professor Nalapat, you are right. Johns Hopkins is perhaps being a little naive in, just picking up Chinese data and putting it on their website. They just don't want to pick up a fight with the Chinese. Perhaps, as I mentioned, President Joe Biden said the Chinese are very touchy. Whenever we mention about this numbers and statistics, they just don't respond. Our guest from the United States, I think, can get us now. Dr. Ravi Godse. He's an internal medicine specialist, live from Pennsylvania, United States. Mr. Godse, if you are getting me, my question is, Chinese have released these numbers today, and they are saying 60,000 in 1.5 months. Now, we have this report from The Guardian, which says, which quotes a British agency, data firm called Affinity. And it says that they estimate that about 9,000 people in China are probably dying each day because of COVID. Now, which numbers to believe? Andrew Leung, on behalf of the Chinese, speaking for the Chinese state, is throwing the Johns Hopkins numbers, which are on their website. I mean, clearly, there's something amiss if you look at these numbers from the probability and the statistics perspective. So if the Chinese lost a certain number in 2.5 years when they were not sharing data, and suddenly you have, in the last 1.5 months, 60,000 people dying, I think there is little more than meets the eye. Dr. Godse.
I think the number is somewhere in the middle. I think if China is saying 60,000, then the number obviously is higher than that. But before I say on any show, let me first assure the Indian population, there's not going to be a third wave in India. What is happening in China will not happen in India. I stake my reputation on it. I guarantee it. China did 3 years of COVID appropriate behavior, and look where China is now. So we should also stop talking about this COVID appropriate behavior. It's meaningless. I think China has about 60 million cases. If 10,000 people have moderate infection and one person is dying, then for 60,000 deaths, if you multiply it by 10,000, we have about 60 million people. So 60 million cases, moderate cases. So if there are 10 cases hidden behind each moderate case, 10 to 100, 600 million Chinese have already been infected. And the hospitalization went down from 123,000 to 115,000. So the peak almost seems to be passed. But because of the Chinese New Year, now that the people are going into the rural areas, interestingly, only 50 crore Chinese live in the rural hinterland. Most people live in the city. And there are only 13 lakh doctors for those 50 crore population and only 18 lakh nurses. They also have grassroots, but obviously the numbers, the problem is, what do you believe? Whether you believe the numbers coming out of China or whether you believe social media. You're asking me to make a choice between Kader Khan and Shakti Kapoor. Both are bad, So what do we really believe?
No. Let me correct you. I was quoting the Guardian from London. I was not quoting any social media figures. I was quoting Guardian, which I believe is seen as a responsible broadsheet. I was quoting them. I mean, I was not picking up numbers from social media. I have the Chinese numbers, I have the WHO numbers, and I have the Guardian.
Sure, I'm sorry about that. So I think the crux of this dealing with this Omicron is a mild variant. It's basically stays in nose and throat. China has vaccinated everybody over the age of 3, and they have also boosted about 50%. Only problem that nobody talks about, there are two problems. One is a lot of Chinese people have taken fake vaccination certificate. And I can tell you that because I have a lot of Chinese friends and I know about their parents. So the seniors have not really taken the vaccine. They have taken fake certificate. And second is CoronaVac and Sinovac, to China's mainstream, the workhorses. They are about 20% less efficacious against serious disease compared to Covishield and Covaxin. So 20% doesn't sound that much. But if you're a poor swimmer and the water is up to here, and the
Oh,
20% brings it down. So
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead. I was
make,
just interjecting, but go ahead. Finish your point.
So that might make the difference why we are seeing, and the bad news might yet to come from China. But we just hope and pray that they do fine. And what we can do from Indian perspective right now,
of course,
Trailway,
we pray.
if we send them apart from praying, Nirma Trailway, if we send 100 packets to China, per packet for 100 packets, we'll save 90 lives. 80 by actually saving them, and 10 by reducing the crush on the hospitals. Taiwan is so small, it's like tiny. It has bought Paxlovid worth 6,000 crores from India, and there is some fake Paxlovid going. Only problem is, like, there are 12 Indian companies which are making. I just talked to top Indian source at Pfizer. 12 companies are making it. My only fear is, I'm guaranteeing there is no third wave. But just to jinx it that there is no third wave, I think India should stockpile at least 1 million packets of Nirma Trailway and then airlift everything to China right now. That's what we can do. I think the peak is past. China should be okay.
I think
soon.
That's an important point you are making, Dr. Godse. And of course, we pray that Chinese do not suffer like the rest of the world has. Though, of course, the origin of the virus is in China. What you made an important point that there might be fake certificates, particularly of the elderly. And it's sort of, Andrew, you have to get in here before I go to Professor Madhav Nalapat for the strategic aspect of this story. The geostrategic aspect, rather. Dr. Godse is saying it's likely that the elderly population, particularly in China, is perhaps not really as vaccinated as the numbers suggest. Again, some kind of fudging coming out of the story. And that is proven by the numbers that have been released today, because the release by the Chinese National Health Commission specifically says that the average age of those who have died was 80.3 years and 90% of the fatalities were aged 65 or over. So it seems an element of mishandling of the situation is already really coming out, Andrew.
Definitely, there is a reality that the elderly people generally are more resistant and more suspicious of vaccines. But that's the case on the mainland, and that's also to a certain extent the case in Hong Kong. And by the way, I think your other guest needs to do his maths properly. Hong Kong's population is not 0.1% of China's population. Hong Kong's population is 7 million people compared with 1.4 billion. Do your math properly. It's not 0.1%. It's 0.00 something percent. Okay. All right. By the way,
it's not about maths. I think it's about one country, two systems. Andrew, it's not about maths. It's about one country, two systems, as you would say. It's about one country, two systems, as you would say. It's not about maths.
Have not got have not been infected at all. So the herd immunity level is very, very low. So that's why with the pandemic moving into an
I will give the opportunity to Professor Nalapat to respond.
Much less deadly. China has now dropped the zero COVID strategy and getting more and more people infected in a way, so that there is more herd immunity, because the death rate is much, much lower. But at the same time, boosting the vaccination rate.
Okay. I understood your point, Andrew. Let me take this to Professor Nalapat. Professor Nalapat, the argument on behalf of Andrew, both in the first and the second intervention that he has made, is that the death rate per 100,000 people, Andrew, listen to me. The death rate per 100,000 people for China is still much lower than what Japan is facing or the United States is facing. But let's try to understand the geostrategic aspect of this story, this development that has taken place today, Professor Nalapat. The numbers come just about a week after WHO really reprimanded, and Dr. Tedros is someone who was seen as being a little soft and indulgent with the Chinese over the last couple of years. And he, in fact, had to reprimand China and say that your numbers are not reliable, not regular, not rapid enough. It's only after that. Also, a couple of days after this observation by the WHO, the Americans really came back with travel restrictions on the Chinese. And perhaps that got the Chinese communist state worried about the possibility of these steps and this perception really hitting their economy. And that's why they have come out with these numbers, howsoever half-baked they are. Professor Nalapat.
Abhishek, the Hong Kong population is 7 million, 1.4 billion China, 0.5% was my estimate. That is half of 1% of the population. I mean, that's the maths I did before I came on the program. And I believe that's accurate. I believe that's accurate. I just want to make a very small point. And that is that, unfortunately, now Andrew is in Hong Kong. He may not have access to a lot of data. These days in Hong Kong, that kind of access may be restricted. I'd like to say that in SARS-1, initially there was a reluctance on the part of the Chinese state to share data, but subsequently they became quite transparent about it. And as a consequence, SARS-1 did not develop into a deadly pandemic. It was there, it came in different countries, and then there were some fatalities in some other countries as well, but it was not a pandemic. In the case of SARS-2, from day one,
no, Professor Nalapat, my question was, is the Chinese communist state really in a very cold manner, just responding to the change situation where WHO is questioning them, the United States is putting restrictions, and it could hurt their economy, and they really can't afford that after 2.5 years of almost semi-lockdown, shutdown situation so far as their manufacturing is concerned. So they are being absolutely strategic about it and not concerned about their population. That's the point I was making, Professor Nalapat.
Well, I'd like to say that today in social media, with satellites circling all over the place, it's very difficult to conceal things. Technology is galloping ahead much faster than the ability of certain states to restrict the flow of information. And I can tell you very clearly that based on the information that is there are a huge number of cases in China. And as Dr. Godse has pointed out, because of the lack of herd immunity there, caused by this complete and extreme lockdowns that were there. And in India, we did not have a lockdown in 2021. We did not have a lockdown in 2022. Prime Minister Modi refused to do that. We have not got a vaccine mandate till now. And that is why our record is much better. The fact is sometimes less government is better than too much government.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the Chinese communist state has really taken some missteps from the zero COVID policy to absolutely abrupt pushback or pullback actually of the same policy. And now I think from one step to another, they seem to be fumbling and making more mistakes. It's hoped that the Chinese state would learn from its mistakes and not let its population suffer. More importantly, not let the world go through a cycle. Though, of course, Dr. Godse believes this variant is not going to be as harmful as Delta was. But of course, we have to hope and pray for the Chinese and for the rest of the world. On that note, I thank all my guests, Professor Nalapat, Andrew in Hong Kong, and of course, Dr. Godse in Pennsylvania, United States. We are back tomorrow 9 p.m. with the debate. Thank you so much for watching.
In the global employability rankings by Times Higher Education UK, only the following 6 institutions from India are ranked amongst the top 230 in the world for having the most employable graduates. IIT Delhi, IISc Bangalore, IIT Bombay, IIM Ahmedabad, IIT Kharagpur and Amity University.